Phil Donahue, who died today, was the quintessential talk show host. Oprah Winfrey, who ultimately knocked him off the air, was a TV star. I wish we had more hosts and fewer stars. And here's why. You may have heard that Phil Donahue passed away today at the age of 88. He actually just got honored this year for his amazing career in broadcasting with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. President Biden presented him with that at the White House. He had been on TV for 29 seasons with the Phil Donahue Show, mostly in syndication nationally. Did more than 7,000 episodes, got like 20 Emmy Awards, including a lot of them for Outstanding Talk Show Host. Started off as just a regular guy in an Irish Catholic family in Cleveland, went to Notre Dame, worked in Dayton, where eventually he got jobs in TV, and then started hosting a local show, which became nationally syndicated. The show, after a few years, moved to Chicago. 10 years later, it moved to New York. And I think the reason he was one of my favorites has to do with something that I got the benefit of growing up that today's young adults don't have, and they will be much worse off for it. A lot of podcasts and YouTube channels out there today think that they're doing a talk show because it's two guys and a mic and they've got a guest and they're doing the thing, and they think that they are acting in the spirit of a talk show. Now, there are many different ways to do shows, and I'm not trying to spit out some kind of orthodoxy about like this is the one true way of broadcasting. The thing is, though, that Phil Donahue had the kind of show we don't really have except in a very few places, mostly on public media, including the show that I helped launch, 1A. But we need many more of them. When his show started, it was a little show out of Dayton, Ohio, right? Nobody was clamoring to go on with Phil Donahue. Like, who is that guy? Some Midwestern guy? Like, what is this show? And so instead of doing his show around celebrities and, you know, the things that they want to talk about or the projects they want to promote, which is like 90% of talk shows and podcasts today, at least the big ones, he had to do his show around issues, right? He was able to get a studio audience to sit in the same room and talk about something interesting, often something super controversial. And he had all kinds of guests on the show who would get him in quite a bit of trouble. I know today we talk about canceling somebody on social media. This was when canceling was real. When canceling meant your show was canceled from the broadcast lineup of a station and you lost your money and all your team lost their jobs. That's canceling. Phil Donahue's show was so remarkable because it was him with a mic, an audience with their questions and points of view, and guests that they could bounce off of. And the show worked when Phil, the guests, and the audience connected. When they got kind of an organic conversation going that began to bounce in different directions and different people put their points of view up against one another, and it sometimes got contentious and sometimes got shocking. And he talked about all kinds of topics. He talked about women's health topics and cultural topics and drugs and political issues and war and social controversies and everything else. You can easily throw spitballs across the internet. You're not going to throw them across the room quite the same way, because that person is there and they will throw them back. And the people around you will give you a hard time for being such a jerk. That humanized these conversations in such a remarkable way. And it was not that long ago in our history when shows like Donahue were very common. But when Oprah supplanted Donahue as the queen of the hill in television, daytime television, there was this huge shift. Phil Donahue was the host of his show. He was the moderator, the facilitator, the ringleader, the connector. I wanted to be more like Phil Donahue when I did 1A, because I never wanted the show to be about my point of view, my perspectives, or me. My values, yes, but my values had to do with bringing people together, having smart conversations, and so on. Phil Donahue had his points of view, for sure. He opposed the Iraq War, which was what kind of got his show on MSNBC, which ran very briefly in the early 2000s, canceled because MSNBC's owner at the time, General Electric, was and is a defense contractor. So that did not work well. But By and large, the show was more about just letting people talk about whatever they thought. But Oprah Winfrey was not the host of the Oprah Winfrey Show. Oprah was the star of the Oprah Winfrey Show. And there's a difference. As the host of 1A, I cannot do the show if you and the guests don't show up. You bring something, I bring something, and my job is just to help mix it together in a useful way. Oprah doesn't need anyone but Oprah to do the Oprah Winfrey Show at the end of the day. And there were some episodes where it was just her. Not many, but her and one other guest or her and the audience, you could still make a show. People would show up just to see Oprah. Oprah was the star of that show. Phil Donahue was the host of his show. And so then the model shifted to either more personality-driven talk shows with like a singular figure, like the Drew Barrymore show, where it's about her and some other famous person and audience members going, "I'm so glad to be here," and that's all they really need them to do. Or about something really controversial like midget transvestites throwing chairs at their illegitimate children. Cherry, cherry, cherry. But there was also another model on the air around the same time, and it was Morton Downey Jr. Remember him? There were a few shows like Morton Downey Jr., Joe Pyne before him. That's a blast from the deep past for some of you, Pyne, who were just these like hyper-opinionated loudmouths. And Phil Donahue was not that guy. And they were there to just kind of be bombastic and loud, ostensibly conservative libertarian. And that was the other model. So here you have this guy, Phil Donahue, who was standing up for a space where everyone was welcome to talk about everything under the sun. If it exists, let's identify it and discuss it. That was Phil Donahue's model. But it's hard to sustain unless you have someone who has the humility and the empathy to connect with all kinds of people. Oprah has that empathy, but I think her model didn't require her to have the humility to sort of subordinate her point of view to other people's enough to let them share space with her. It ultimately became about her outlook on life, which is fine. But we miss something when the people who uphold those shared spaces lose their platforms and nothing emerges to take their places. Partly because it takes a lot of infrastructure to have a physical studio and an actual audience. So I get it. And a lot of companies, especially the media companies today, they can't. They're not, the executives are not good enough to put quality on the air of that caliber. I can't afford to do a show with a studio audience. Would I love to? Hell yes. Can I afford it? No. Problem is we need it. Because we got a lot of people in this country who think, oh, we're so divided, we can't talk to one another anymore. Yeah, we can. I did it a few years ago. I did it during the Trump administration. Connection is vital for democracy. I hate to break it to you, but you can't do democracy with just your friends. Democracy happens in the spaces where we conflict. That's what elections are about. That's what voting is about. It's to work within that friction. And if you don't model for the American people regularly how to do that, why would they believe that we can talk to one another? Why would they believe we can work together? They've never seen it. So you take a generation like the young adults we have today who are brilliant and fabulous and wonderful. But you don't show that generation what it looks like when intelligent, reasonable people disagree without being disagreeable. How do you expect them to uphold that part of democracy? And Phil Donahue taught generations of us, myself included, that skill. And I worry that unless we have more Phil Donahues, unless more people understand what he did and see modeled what he offered to the American people, we're going to be more divided as a country, not because we can't listen to one another, but because we don't know how. Because no one shows us how. Where do we go today to watch the American people have spirited, reasonable, respectful conversations with one another? And if we don't have those spaces, what do you expect 2025 to look like? You think electing Kamala Harris is just going to make the country more pleasant all of a sudden? Everyone's just going to be nicer? Really? Are you sure? If Donald Trump wins the election, you think that people are just going to roll over and take it? The Women's March was the day after his inauguration. It started instantaneously. You don't think we still need those shared spaces in a country that will still be divided after the November election? Maybe even more divided than it is right now? I don't know how we build the kind of country we want unless we're able to find ways to be a little less Oprah and a little more Donahue. As much as I love both, we've got enough wannabe Oprahs out there today. We got enough stars. We need some more gracious hosts who are willing to say, we need to talk. You go first. Am I crazy? Is this stupid? Do we not need any more Donahues? Am I completely wrong? If so, tell me in the comments. Or maybe you did grow up with or watch Donahue, and maybe you do remember and you understand what I'm trying to say, and you can think of areas in your own life, work, community, neighborhood, city, where that kind of gracious hosting would make a difference. I'd like to know that too. Thank you for making time for me. Please stay in touch. And remember, my friend, to keep on listening, keep on being gracious, keep on being a connector, and keep on shining, because someone like me needs your light right now.